Just one thing to provide context for the purpose work, and essentially our work is to build movements. We kind of sometimes say organising the world's people, but it sounds very top-down. It's kind of, building tools to enable people to organise themselves on a whole range of issues, from human rights, women's rights, to education, environment, health, the food industry, politics, money in politics, a range of different things. Sort of, as you said, it's global, it's national, it's sort of city-based. I came out of a decade ago, working on the campaign in 2004, went from there into working in conventional party politics. So worked for the leader of the opposition, became the Prime Minister in Australia, 3 elections in that time, and experienced both. I mean, in some ways I would say I'm still optimistic about the fact that, parliaments still exist and governments still exist and they're going to be a part of achieving change, but also I really experienced the limitations of conventional power, the sort of resistance to innovation, the shocking lack of creativity in the old institutions of power like governments and parliaments and so on. But also the limitation that even when you've got good people who really want to do good things in governments, of which you actually have a lot in progressive governments around the world, but they're limited partly by their sense of kind of public licence, their ability to actually be able to stand up and say the community wants this. So what President Obama has done since his re-election with setting up Organising for Action in America, to take the power of this big mobilised community of voters and supporters and make them into activists for his administration. So when they're doing gun control, they're mobilising a big community. That to me it's a really interesting development, and it's a really interesting lesson for the second term of Obama, because that's certainly what I experienced inside government, was that many things that we wanted to do we couldn't do because governments have very limited power these days. There's many vested interests they face: corporate power, media power, the Murdochs of the world, and so on. And so they have a limited political capital. If they can't say, hey, the community wants this, we're responding to it, then it's really hard to do more than a handful of things. So that was partly why I jumped into the world of what I'm doing now, working with purpose, is because mobilising people for action gives power to governments. And I think, we sometimes think in terms of the new power institutions and the old power institutions, and how building big online movements like in a vast 20 million people, or All Out, global gay rights group, 1.5 million, Walk Free, which is an anti-slavery group, 1 million people, that these large-scale movements really have the potential for change. And why? Because they're much faster, they're more creative, they have a more authentic voice, they're able to pick up on changes and seize the sort of zeitgeist. They mobilise more people. I mean, Get Up, for example, in Australia, which is a big online political movement, has 600,000 members. The Labor Party that I'm a part of has 40,000, and probably only a fraction of them are actually genuine members who pay their own fees. The energy has shifted away from old institutions towards these new ways of mobilising people. So, if I can jump to our questions that we're seeking to answer about what we're learning. Positive surprises that I've seen in the sort of the now, the very recent past. I'm excited to see how there is real energy for mobilising people at a very local level. So one of the innovations that Purpose has been involved with the last 18 months is an organisation called My Rio, Rio, but I can't speak Portuguese, so I just mangle it. But it's essentially a Rio de Janeiro-based citizen movement, for civic renewal. And I think in an era where people are, an anti-politics era where people are deeply cynical of particularly national governments, the traditional sort of power holders, the local stuff is very important, it's very immediate, and it really matters, especially in emerging economies, but actually, everywhere. So London Citizens, UK citizens are really interesting initiatives in community organising here. I'm excited to see how we can combine the scale and speed of the sort of digital platform with the really great history of community organising, Some of the most exciting stuff I've seen working in the US in the last couple of years is the old Saul Alinsky Industrial Areas Foundation. Marshall Gaines being a big influence, we mentioned before. And you meet African American women in their 70s who have for 50 years been community activists. And the stuff they've done, it's modest, but it's very real when they can point to 4,000 homes, created affordable homes in Brooklyn, for example, for people who would never have been able to get into a home before because of their activism. And it develops lasting leaders at a community level. So my Rio has had some successes. For example, as part of the redevelopment of Rio de Janeiro for the Olympics and the World Cup, the local authorities chose to announce at very short notice that they were closing a school. This school was the only one that provided in the region for kids with disabilities. They had no answer to how they were going to look after those kids. They basically said, they'll just be spread out to other schools. But there were no programs and no assistance available for the kids with disabilities in that area. So this community, which is now 100,000 people, it's 1 in 20 of people in their 20s, and aged 20 to 29 in Rio, so it's grown to some scale for something that's only 18 months old. And they basically just put a webcam on the front door and the front gate and the side gates of the school so that their community could watch 24 hours a day if the bulldozers came in. And so it was a way of creating a disruptive form of accountability. And by doing that and giving it a real sense of we're going to fight and we're going to watch and we're going to be out there if those bulldozers turn up, they suspended the decision to close that school. They've also had success on an environmental law that was going to be changed in the state legislature to essentially make it really easy for development to run through. Property redevelopment, big issue in Rio right now. They were able to, within a matter of hours, turn up a couple hundred people to the city legislature, which has never been done at that with that speed before. And that kind of the way in which governments operate often to serve the interests of powerful property development interests was exposed, and the legislature was then refused to vote on the bill because what they saw in a couple of hundred people standing in the public gallery was an indication. I think 7,000 people had signed a petition within a few hours. That showed power. It showed the ability to mobilise, and so that law was withdrawn. So we're seeing real power happen, and those are just a couple of examples. But we're looking at rolling out a similar movement for Sao Paulo and Mexico City in the next little while. So seeing the application of this big global stuff and really make an impact on a local level, that excites me. And it excites me because of the potential to re-engage people with politics in a way that's positive and has real results. A couple of other positives. I think the power of creative content, the Koenig video from last year, deep problems with the whole theory of change and all of that about what invisible children are doing. But just the fact that a really well-told story could grab people's attention on a rather obscure issue, I think that's a real positive. The disruptive impact of online organising in politics. We mentioned Pop Star Movement, Beppe Grilling getting 26% of the vote and refusing. I mean, he actually banned his candidates from appearing on television. So basically an entirely online-based form of organising. Really important in Italy when Berlusconi has had such a grip on the sort of traditional media. The need, we need to be able to bypass the power of traditional media sometimes, and they've demonstrated the power to do that. I was asked about negative surprises. Look, the big thing, I don't know how surprising it is, but we're dealing with many intractable problems. I mean, I'm just profoundly distressed about the lack of progress we're achieving on climate change. It is the issue above all issues for planetary survival. And not that I'm pessimistic, and the work at 350.org is fantastic. But seriously, think of where we are and how little progress and how the old power institutions are just, in the grip of the power of the fossil fuel industry. No surprise about that, because I think that we have to understand in organising the world's people that ultimately we're dealing with power structures, and we have to build permanent power, institutions of power, organising people for power, to overcome the enormous weight of power that those interests have. So intractable problems are a big issue to me. We've been did an initiative in last year's election in the US called Unpack, which is against the power of money in politics in the US. That's another, I mean, we did some cool stuff, we did some good ads. I think that we've found some ways to take a very complex issue and make it much more simpler and fun, a kind of Pac-Man game that showed a sort of congressman swallowing up money and sort of hitting the big ones when he sort of got the big campaign dollars. This is how the system works. But actually changing that is really hard. And just structurally that's terribly important, because the power of money in politics is the reason why the fossil fuel industry has so much power and stops progress in climate change in the US, and the US blocking climate change progress is of course key to why internationally we're not having problems. So part of it is like working out, going to the root cause, the structures of power, money in politics, but it's a really tough problem to solve, and it's not something that you can just do on Facebook. Three innovations. Three innovations that I think are exciting and are going on. Localisation, which I mentioned with the city-based projects, but just seeing how interest in politics is being regenerated by local community organising in the United Kingdom, for example. Secondly, I think a big issue for us is how we deepen people's political engagement. So you've got these models like Change.org and Avaz that have had a very strong focus on the sort of petition, which is great because it's often the first political act that people do. But our big thing is how we move people through a process of deepening engagement, how we develop the kind of leadership that we've been talking about tonight. We think a lot about that in our projects at Purpose, of how do you give people authentic ways to be political actors. And it's part of that is from online to offline, but there's a whole lot of things that you can do online as well, users creating their own content. How do we tap into the creativity of the communities of organisers and activists? So you think of, I walk around here and the hub here is our starting point for Purpose in our office, getting this going in London. I walk around here and I see the amazing creativity, and I want to, part of me as the sort of the campaigner part of me is, I just realise the power of culture, of creating fresh ways of telling stories and getting a message across in an age where you've just got such a cacophony of voices going on all the time. So finding ways to tap into that power of creativity is a big thing for us, because that's a way of deepening people's engagement. And last thing I'd say, and it's just a little bit like the climate change issue, is shareholder activism. I think we haven't worked out yet how to use digital platforms to really mobilise the power of shareholders and institutional capital. I reckon there's a lot that we can do there. I think it's quite critical to a whole bunch of issues. Climate's one of many. Food industry is another really important one. Creating more accountability at the corporate level. So I'd be excited to see some models of how that works. One other area of organising where I think we haven't found out yet how to do this well, but corporations like workplaces, people spend most of their lives at work, or more hours at work than anything else. And I think there's real potential. People stuck in boring jobs, white-collar jobs in industrial parks, that there's something about doing more than just handing out the kit tin and getting people to give money. And I think there could be some real fun stuff which is disruptive, where corporations, offices either support or try and stop their workers organising for causes and organising for change. So I reckon that might be interesting to see down the track. Last thing to say is I think our biggest challenge is that you see bits and pieces like good storytelling, fresh tactics for organising, good strategy, blah blah blah. The hard thing is having all of those, right? It's bringing all of those pieces together, and it's only when you bring them together that you really get the lasting institutional change. So that's the kind of stuff that our team we try and do, but it's tough. But obviously when you see it done, it's incredibly rewarding.